Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass. I am Carrie Saldo. Good morning. It is June 26th. I am joined here in studio by former state senator from the 413, Adam Hinds, Aprell May Munford with the Springfield Republican Newspaper, and joining us on the phone, Clarence Fanto, a reporter from the Berkshire Eagle. If you have thoughts, you can email The Rundown at nepm.org. And of course, check out our YouTube live stream this morning. Coming up, our panel's thoughts on why it's so hard to fill civic and volunteer roles in the Berkshires. And after the MCAS were nixed as a graduation requirement, the state releases its proposal for what could be next. And protected green space. Mass Audubon develops a new wildlife preserve in the 413. But first, a few news items related to data centers this week. NEPM's Phil Bishop reporting yesterday that Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey announced that she would freeze tax incentives for data centers in the state. Developers must show that they are willing to meet financial and environmental benchmarks before she is willing to grant those incentives. Meanwhile, Aprell May Munford, you reported this week for the Springfield Republican Newspaper, quoting here, Holyoke is the first city in the state to enforce a full ban on data centers. Mayor Josh Garcia signed the ban into law on last Thursday, just days after the city council approved the measure. Why did Holyoke leaders take this step?
So they took this step because there was a proposed data center that wanted to come into the city. $2 million of tax revenue was for this proposed data center. 2 buildings in the industrial area that would be taken offline. But councilors and certain people in the community were worried about the environmental impacts. So they wanted to look at a moratorium, but they also, there was other councilors who wanted to look at a ban.
And they went for the ban. And some of the concerns that they have brought up, they're not unique concerns. We're seeing them here in Massachusetts more broadly and the country. The data centers are incredibly energy intensive, and they can also use a huge amount of water to cool all the computer components that are being used. Now, there is, interestingly, already a data center in Holyoke, the high-speed computing center there, but that is carved out. There's a exemption for that existing space, right?
Correct. So they are allowed to use up to 12 megawatts for their facility. But so, people were really concerned about the energy use. There were some councilors who said it wouldn't be so much energy use. The developers said it would be a green facility as well and would use the existing structure. But it all came down to it. The voters didn't want it, and they decided to go with the ban.
And so this proposal was from Boston-based Chestnut River Power and Infrastructure. As you said, it was a $200 million data center proposed for these defunct sites that are just kind of sitting there. But this comes at a time, as I'm saying, as data centers are this hot topic. The Boston Globe, a headline this week, Beverly Mayor, one of 40 worldwide to endorse data center development pact. A little bit from that story. 40 mayors from around the world have signed onto a pact announced Tuesday to try to shape how urban data centers are built and operated. It's their vision for how urban data center development can be done sustainably and not at the expense of their cities' natural resources, energy prices, or climate targets. Meanwhile, go ahead.
I was going to say at least 14 states nationwide are looking into a statewide ban. But also one of the things that I heard in the meetings was, residents in Ward 1, they dealt with similar physical things too, like with their health from past former industries. And so they want to make sure that even though we're implementing new technology, there's no health implications later on down the line.
So being a little more conservative. Karen Brown spoke to Benjamin Marshall, who is with the Chestnut River Power and Infrastructure, and he said his company planned carefully around Holyoke's infrastructure, and they were planning to minimize environmental impact. He was concerned that this is kind of fear-based thinking on the part of Holyoke, but also saying, they learned some lessons and how they might move ahead with a proposal in the future. But I think, maybe Benjamin Marshall should not be hitting any of these betting sites anytime soon, because he told Jim Kinney at the beginning of the month, quote, if you can't get a data center in Holyoke, you're not going to get a data center anywhere in Massachusetts. Adam Hinds, what do you think?
Well, they're just unpopular around the country. Gallup did a poll last month that said that 71% of Americans would oppose them in their communities. And we've literally watched it in rural areas in Utah and North Carolina. New York State just put a pause. I think Maryland and Michigan are going to be next. And so, it's this really interesting, politically, this interesting mix of, sure, you have your environmentalists and kind of alumni activists joining with folks who don't like what it means in their backyard, and also just the sense of we're pushing back against big data and this corporation that we feel are increasingly concerned about. What are they doing to me? Why are they making so much money? And so there's a real confluence of opposition that's culminating in events like this.
Clarence Fanto, the Associated Press last week reported that federal regulators agreed to let large energy users connect more quickly to the nation's inefficient and aging electric transmission system to accommodate surging demand from power-hungry artificial intelligence data centers. Energy Secretary Chris Wright had urged the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to act in an effort to help the United States better compete with China for superiority in the fast-growing AI sector. Tech companies and data center developers have welcomed the chances for faster connections to the country's power supply. So seeing a national, perhaps not surprising, seeing a different national tack than we are here in Massachusetts. What do you make of that, Clarence?
Well, here in Berkshire County, there's certainly no welcome mat for data centers. And in fact, I'd say there's a locked door. This came up at a community development board meeting in Pittsfield, our largest city, not very large, here in the Berkshires. And the board agreed to consider a moratorium on or some kind of regulation to protect Pittsfield from any possible data center emerging. The city planner, Kevin Rayner, pointed out that it's been popping up across the state, and these centers kind of can emerge quickly, and it's important to consider some protection and regulation for Pittsfield because they take up such a large portion of municipal resources, and he said they emit a lot of heat that can heat up the local atmosphere. We certainly don't need any more of that.
And that was done preemptively. There's no plans, as we know, right? Publicly, nothing has been brought forth as of yet saying,
nothing
hey, we
official.
want to put a data center in Pittsfield.
No, nothing official, and I would bet 99-1 it's not going to happen here.
Well, it's also interesting that we have to sort of address the elephant in the room, which is we're all using AI on almost a consistent basis, whether we're actively using it in the form of something like ChatGPT or inactively, right? Like almost any search on our phones, is using this in the background. And I was doing a little digging, and it's really difficult to click a button to opt out. Right. PC Magazine has a story of sort of a workaround. We'll have a link to that in our show notes for those of you who might want to sort of opt out of this and in a less straightforward way than perhaps any of us might like. Aprell.
I think that what we're losing here in the whole conversation is that this is not the proposed data center was not going to be something big like the one we see in Lowell that's like obstructing. I use this example of the one in Lowell looks like a big Cybertruck among Ferraris, right? Like it just looks so weird and so odd, but we are using data. This would have been a small data center, and we're losing the fact that there was $2 million that could have came to Holyoke for tax revenue. And I think that's why there's a lot of cities looking at moratoriums as opposed to a specific ban, just because we don't want to assume that this is going to be a large draining thing when there's already infrastructure already here, and it could or could not have good impacts or bad impacts.
Is that something that the four counselors who voted against this move said for their reasoning for why they were thinking of supporting it?
Yeah, so there were talks about an ad hoc committee that's also going to get started very soon. That's going back to subcommittee to be voted on. So they do want to, check to see what the data actually is. Because like we said, it's a lot of fear going around because we see big data centers and they look really weird, and they are. Like there's one in North Carolina that is really damaging the water. But this facility, this specific one, was not going to be that big, and it wasn't going to take up that much energy or use At least that's what developers allege.
Well, more to come on this topic, I am sure. Moving on, aging volunteers, retiring officials leave Berkshire County towns facing tough choices. This is reporting by Talia Lissauer from the Berkshire Eagle. Across South County's aging communities, the pool of residents willing or able to fill critical civic roles is shrinking. Small towns are confronting a growing challenge, replacing the people who have kept local government functioning for decades. The challenge is unfolding in one of the state's oldest regions. Berkshire County's median age is 47 and a half, nearly 8 years older than the statewide median of 40.1 years, and more than 26% of residents are 65 or older, compared to 18.9% statewide. The challenge extends beyond any single position or town. As residents age, she wrote, communities across South County are grappling with how to replace longtime public servants, volunteers, and elected officials. At the same time, younger residents often face competing demands, right? There's work, there's family, housing costs, and it makes it harder to take on these civic roles. Clarence Fanto, you're out there in the Berkshires. What's your reaction to this?
Well, it's not just South County, as Talia's excellent report indicated, but it's county-wide. And
probably statewide as well.
Yeah.
Certainly hill towns nearby.
And the feeling that we get here is that because of fallout and dismay over the Trump regime and everything coming out of Washington and national politics, that's kind of filtering down to the local level. And we're seeing not only crucial town positions and sometimes city positions in our two cities go unfilled for periods of time, but participation in local town meetings and elections is way down. 9 or 10% turnout is now considered terrific by local officials.
Wow. And
that's about half or less than half of what it used to be. So there's a disengagement, I would call it, from civic affairs that's very concerning and shows no signs of easing up.
It was fascinating to me in the story, though, the commitment from the people who are currently serving in these positions. You know, you've got a town administrator who announced 2 years ago that she's ready to leave, but she's sticking it out while the town figures out who they're going to put in that place. Similarly, for school committee and other positions, you know, the commitment that these volunteers largely, I mean, this town administrator is paid, but a number of these other positions, and I think this might speak to part of the challenge, right? They're volunteer positions. Mm-hmm. So not only do you have to have the time, but you need to have the money. Go ahead, Clarence.
The people in place are dedicated, and some of them are staying longer, indeed, than they plan to, because finding a replacement or a successor is quite a challenge. So hats off to these volunteers who continue to serve our communities. They deserve a great amount of credit.
Adam Hinds, when you were in the Senate 2017 to 2022, if memory serves there, Berkshires were part of your turf. There were tons of moves afoot to engage younger folks, you know, Berkshire Young Professionals, large businesses recruiting younger talent, you know, General Dynamics, a number of other businesses. Yeah. Where do you think those efforts have stumbled?
Well, interestingly, and so I also represented, you know, half of Hampshire and Franklin in the hill towns. So
yes.
the dynamic extends certainly throughout the region to the smaller towns. And, you know, the problem is there was just some strong headwinds, and there still are. You know, we saw that not only is it population decline, which then, you know, if you have fewer younger families, then you have an aging population. And the schools were a big one. If you have fewer students, then you have less money. The dollars follow the pupils. And then it's a vicious cycle from there. Well, okay, if our schools aren't great, well, I'm not going to move my family there. And that was a big one. We took short-term fixes. We thought, okay, broadband was the issue. We just need to invest in, you know, internet. We did that. Still a challenge. And so we would take on the other short-term issues, by the way. Some came up here. We needed to make exceptions in the law for retirement for when fire chiefs and others, how long they could stay in the job. And
right
so we
now
did
they
that.
need to tap out at 65
That's
for
right.
state law.
And so it was case-by-case exception, and really there needs to be a broader strategy for rural areas in the Commonwealth. And you know, we did a little bit of that with rural school aid and the like. But this is a big one, and it's interesting because our previous study, it's why data centers and other things start to become appealing because it adds to the tax base, construction jobs. You know, maybe not long-term jobs as many as you would hope, and so that's why there's some interest in some areas, but that's what everyone is looking for is how do you add to this tax base when it's only getting smaller and smaller, including also because of conservation land taking acres off the tax rolls and a lot. So it's not an easy problem to fix.
It's one big connective issue. And the other thing that this ties to is population, right? As people age and die off and more folks are not moving in to take their place, we look at, are we going to potentially lose another seat in Congress like we saw, earlier in the 2000s? Right now, trend lines are saying not likely. However, census is coming up in another 4 years and time will tell. Aprell, any final thoughts here?
Yeah, I think that all around the state, people are concerned with young people not being interested in civics. So that's another approach that we have to consider too. Like, how are we teaching this in school? How are we getting kids involved from an early age? Like, we have to bring them up in it so they can understand and know what it is.
Absolutely. All right. Well, still to come here on the rundown, new standards are being considered by the state for high school graduation requirements. We'll dig into that. And a place that is not likely to host AI data centers, a new wildlife preserve, is coming to the Berkshires. You are listening to the rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. I'm Carrie Saldo. Stay with us. Welcome back to the rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. I am Carrie Saldo, joined by former state senator Adam Hinds and journalists Aprell May Munford and Clarence Fanto. Let's get right back into it. And if you have thoughts, you can email therundown@nepm.org. Headline: Mass K-12 Graduation Council urges long runway to introduce new high school graduation standards. This reporting from Sam Drysdale with the State House News Service, reporting last week. Massachusetts students would need to complete college preparatory coursework, known as MassCore, pass end-of-course exams, develop post-secondary plans, and finish a capstone project or portfolio under final high school graduation standard recommendations filed last Wednesday by the K-12 Graduation Council. The report marks the culmination of an 18-month process launched after voters in 2024 approved Question 2, eliminating the MCAS as a graduation requirement and leaving Massachusetts without a statewide graduation standard for the first time in decades. I'll start with just general reaction to this. Adam Hinds.
This is there are a lot of ongoing tensions in this process. Folks are quick to remind that, look, the voters said no high stakes testing. And so there's a tension that I think you see coming out of this recommendations of how do you have statewide consistency? How do you catch districts that are lagging behind for their students? And how do you also, recognize local professional judgment and allow for that local control? And so I think look, this goes back to the legislature now. These are recommendations, and so there's a lot of work to do. If I were the chair of the education committee, I'd start a broad citizen engagement to figure out how to solve some of those tensions that are emerging. How do you make sure that students are learning what they need to without having the high stakes testing attached?
The Mass Teachers Association, for its part, we know lobbied hard for these MCAS to be removed as a graduation requirements were effective. They released a statement in reaction to this saying, the council's report offers many good ideas, yet the proposals that can modernize our public schools are marred by an outdated top-down approach to policymaking driven by the State Department of Elementary and Secondary Education that does not respect the professionalism of educators. This is most evident as the report calls for the imposition of new standardized tests. We urge the state to keep listening and working with students, parents, and educators to get this process right so we can be confident that every graduate from a Massachusetts public high school is ready to succeed in the modern world. So the MTA, Adam, calling for what you are, right? Like have people come in and give their opinion. And there was some of that as the state took these proposals into account. Clarence Fanto, for you, what's your reaction to this? You've watched a lot of different educational perspectives come and go, and now the MCAS, right?
Right, and I think the Teachers Association statement that you just read says it all. From what I've heard, teachers here are not keen to see any new policies coming out of the state that would involve what they dread, which is teaching to the test. Besides that, coming right at the end of the school year, and with several of our school districts still facing huge budget challenges, which could be a whole separate 10-minute discussion that I won't get into. This has not been really on the radar so far, but I'm sure it will be in the fall.
So I mentioned MassCore in my introduction, and that's intended to align high school learning with public higher education, right? Prepping you to go to college if you choose to go to college. And as I've spoken with education advocates over, the last decade even in this area, that's been a real concern for them, that we're sending high school students to college. They are not ready for college, and then they're paying, in many cases, for remedial college courses to catch them up. Aprell, do you think that people will take note of that and like this idea of MassCore?
I'm not sure if people are going to like the idea. I'm of a different opinion of everybody I interviewed about having standardized testing. What I do think is really important and what should be focused on is like the focus on career readiness. And what's interesting is that I remember when I was doing the research, there was not a lot of study about those that did not go to college. Were they successful or were they not successful? Now, I didn't start off going straight to college. I was successful in a hair salon. And those numbers have to be more accounted for, and they have to have I think that it's really important to have a career readiness plan. Lots of students and people know what they want to do. And if you plan that out, map that out, you can be successful with or without college.
And there is the My Career and Academic Plan, which is that MyCap portion of this. And currently, according to the report, 40% of Massachusetts districts currently use that framework, that sort of ready for work framework. It got me thinking about, talking to my parents, their high school experience. Home economics was a huge part, right? Like you learned how to write out a check. You learned how to change a tire. Some of these practical life skills that some folks just don't know anymore because they're not being taught it anywhere along the way. And so I wonder if that will be refolded into some of this MyCap work or not. I think it would be interesting to watch. Of note, as you said, Adam, the recommendations are advisory and they do not themselves create the new graduation standards. Lawmakers would need to enact the legislation before implementation can begin. So there could be a really long gap here between where we are with the MCAS no longer being graduation requirements. We've already had 2 graduation cycles where folks didn't have any specific state standard. Now, obviously, individual districts have their own standards. Thoughts here as we wrap up on whether or not the fact that there isn't a state standard will be problematic in the coming years?
No, 3/4 of the state have their own standards locally, and so I think that comes to the local professional judgment, and so I think that's less a concern than I think making sure everyone knows what they're getting into once the standards come into place, and that's when a long time frame actually makes sense.
All right, more to come here on this. Clarence, moving to some reporting from you recently, Mass Audubon creating its second largest Berkshire Wildlife Reserve on a newly acquired Beckett parcel. It's a 150-acre property in a remote section of Beckett. It was purchased last month by Mass Audubon for $5 million. Clarence, tell us what's unique about this acreage.
Well, it is very remote. It's a dirt road to even get there, and then you find a gate that's down. So I wanted to see it for myself and wander around a bit. Not possible at the present time. It's a huge commitment by Mass Audubon, $5 million to buy it from the family that owned it since the 1960s and created the very private Berkshire Fishing Club there for this 125-acre lake. That's the whole property is 850 acres, by the way. It's just about 2 miles beyond the Jacob's Pillow Dance Festival, and it's going to take perhaps 2 years for Mass Audubon to develop it for the public, very cautiously develop it. They're going to spend about $2.5 million to do that, create some trails, and figure out how to keep it pristine and keep it beautiful the way it is now. You've got to see a photo of it, as we published at BerkshireEagle.com to appreciate it. So it's going to take a while, and they're certainly going to want to take the views of Beckett residents into account.
And you pointed out in your reporting that it's a key habitat for moose, black bear, bobcat, coyote, also some forest tree species, American beech, sugar maple, eastern hemlock, balsam fir, red spruce. So a lot of environmental protection. It's also adjacent to October Mountain State Forest. So you've got, more than 16,000 acres for October Mountain State Forest. But Adam Hinds, putting on your tax generating hat.
Thank you.
What do you think of this?
So, I mean, first, I do want to emphasize that this is a huge carbon removal system, right? In the state of New England, you'd be surprised that Massachusetts has some of the most dense forested land. Maine and others have done a lot of cutting, and so that is huge. We used to refer to Western Mass as the lungs of the state for that reason, and so carbon sequestration. But here's the problem, right? I alluded to it earlier. You're now taking these large number of acres out of the local tax roll, and so there is typically a payment in lieu of taxes, but it's often voluntary. We worked really hard to make sure at least state land we put more and more into the budget so that towns would be compensated. I also tried to make sure you could have a financial benefit for creating a carbon bank, right? But that doesn't exist. So it's a beautiful thing. I'm glad it's happening, and we also have to look out for the small towns.
And I think that even becomes more interesting to watch whether or not there will be a payment in lieu of taxes here or anywhere where land is conserved, because Mass Audubon has a 30/30 Catalyst Fund, which has a goal to protect 30% of 30% of open land in Massachusetts by 2030. We also have, the state has its own climate goals that are quite aggressive in terms of reducing carbon footprint and emissions. So obviously land preservation helps with that because we're helping to trap that carbon. It's really a double-edged sword here. Aprell.
I just wrote a story yesterday about, I think it's like 7.6 million went out to trails to create trails in these areas. West Springfield's Bear Hole just got some funding for their trail and their area over there. So I think that this is so... I mean, I don't know if it's planned like that, but data centers, conserving, it's just...
We're capstoning. We've got two sides of a scale here, right?
Yeah.
Nowhere to go.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think we need more of this. And yeah, people need to get out. And we know that from COVID. Like, there was a lot of people who had, like, green space deserts. Like, they couldn't get outside. And so I think we're thinking about that. And I think, reducing the carbon footprint is on its way.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to next steps, Clarence, on this. Community meetings are going to be held in Beckett to gather ideas from residents about how to make this land more publicly accessible, right?
Yes, that's going to be ongoing this summer as the summer residents of Beckett set up shop for the season.
All right, we'll keep an eye on that
yeah.
for sure. All right, scoops, praise, and predictions here this morning, folks. Give us a scoop on a story that you're working on, heap of praise on some newsworthy nugget, or maybe make a prediction about the news. Clarence Fanto, I understand you have a prediction.
Yes, there's a very strong cultural season shaping up and already getting underway here in the Berkshires. Tanglewood, the Jacob's Pillow Dance Festival, our theaters in Pittsfield, Stockbridge, and elsewhere are revving up, and there's some terrific reviews of the new productions. And what we're hearing from the hospitality industry is that reservations are already very hard to come by, especially for the upcoming holiday weekend and then through the summer. So since this is the economic engine that drives Berkshire County to a large extent, either the second or the third largest industry, if you could call it that, according to the numbers you look at, the prediction is that it will be a bang-up season for summer tourism.
Aprell May Munford.
We have Pride Fest in Holyoke Veterans Park on Saturday, and then Cotton Candy and Nightmares Fashion Show by Avado in Springfield on Saturday on Bay Street.
Fun things to look forward to. Adam Hinds.
Praise to the United States men's soccer team. They are really, really good. Despite last night where they rested 9 of their starters, we'll put that aside. I predict they'll make it to the Final Four, semifinals.
There's soccer going on right now? World Cup madness sweeping the nation. All right, that's the rundown for today, Friday, June 26th. My thanks to Adam Hinds, Aprell May Munford, and Clarence Fanto on the phone. I am Carrie Saldo. You've been listening to The Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM and streaming live on YouTube. Have a great day.